Hello there.
Hi. hello,
Good afternoon, BookTube.
Yeah. So it's Roz from Scully Dandling About the Books.
And Tilly from Tilly's Shelf, and we're back for another Discussing Drama.
Our monthly visit to the world of plays, where we both read one and then have a bit of a chat about it.
Yeah, discuss it. And we started for a year and we decided to carry it on because we just enjoy it so much.
And this month, when we were deciding what would we read, we were aware that it's American Black History Month. So we thought, let's look for a Black American playwright and read something by them. And we found a couple, kind of thought of a couple. One was Lorraine Hansberry and the other was August Wilson. And we wound up choosing A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry.
Yeah, we should just say Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, you've read it, I've read most of it. It's just that discussing two plays in the same video would just not give both of them the amount of attention that they deserve, I think.
Yes. So in one way or another, we'll come back to Ma Rainey, either together or in our own like monthly wrap-ups. So, and the other thing that I just want to say up front is that when I did my sort of February, TBR plan sort of video, I said to the world of BookTube, the lovely world of BookTube, that if people knew those playwrights and those two plays, A Raisin and Ma Rainey, if they'd like to comment or message me or whatever, that we'd sort of incorporate that into our discussion. And a few people did, so we will. And thanks, so special thank you to Kit of Kit's World, Stephanie Cohen, and above all, Courtney Ferriter, who gave us some really interesting things to think about.
So should we introduce a little bit about A Raisin in the Sun then?
Yes.
So it was written by Lorraine Hansberry in 1959 and was performed on Broadway. Since then, it has come to the West End. It's been made into a film in 1961. It's been adapted as a musical, as a TV film twice, most recently in 2008, in which it starred P. Diddy, Sean Combs, who was widely regarded as perhaps maybe not the best actor for the role, but we think maybe he was there to bring in the younger audience, perhaps. And most recently that it's been updated on Wikipedia, it was at the Arena in Washington in 2017.
So what we didn't perhaps fully realize when we sort of picked it a bit, not randomly, we researched a little, but coming from the UK, I hadn't particularly heard of Lorraine Hansberry. I hadn't particularly heard of it as a film, or, although it's been produced here, it wasn't. And what we realised on reading it and reading up a bit more about it is that it's an enormously significant play in sort of American drama and Black American writing. So, we're really thrilled that we found it and read it.
So it was the first play to be performed on Broadway that was by a Black woman or by a Black author of any gender, and also the first Black director. It was nominated for 4 Tony Awards, and Hansberry actually became the first Black woman to receive the Circle Award, which is a prestigious theatre writers award from New York, I believe. Yeah,
so big deal, and so a significant play, but also just a play of enormous quality and big themes. So
it's a really powerful play.
We hit gold reading this one.
Yeah, we were very lucky. So where do we want to start?
Well, maybe we should give just a little little summary of plot and characters, sort of little outline. Do you want to do that?
Let's go with that. Why don't you do that?
Okay, so the play all takes place in the living room come kitchen of a 2-bedroom flat in a sort of relatively poor area of Chicago. It's set in the 1920s. It was written in the 1950s, but it's set in the 1920s. And this extended family live in this flat. And So there's the matriarch, Lena, who is relatively recently widowed. There's her son, Walter, Walter's wife, Ruth. Walter's working as a chauffeur and is sort of quite frustrated in his life. Ruth is an incredibly hardworking, holds everything together person. They have a young son, Travis, who's a schoolboy who has to sleep on the sofa in the living room. And then the other person living in the house is Benita, who is Walter's sister and Lena's daughter, and is the younger one, and she's a student and very aspirational, hoping to become a doctor or whatever. So that's the sort of the setup. And they moved into this rented flat sort of years before with high hopes of, Lena and husband, high hopes of sort of moving on and so on, and have basically been stuck there ever since. But she has a life insurance payout that she's expecting because her Walter Senior died, and it's all about, this transformatory amount of money, sort of £10,000, and what they're going to do with it as a family. And it's obviously it's her money, but they've all got kind of hopes and dreams that perhaps the money's going to help fulfill. So it's a family drama, but with bigger ramifications. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's pretty detailed. Yes. So did you want to bring in some of the things that people have commented on, and then we had some things to respond to from those?
Yes, well, because one of the things that we came to realise, and I realised from people's comments, is that although this is a play that neither you nor I knew at all, it obviously is something that is quite often taught in schools and colleges in the US. And so Stephanie Cohen commented, like, remembering doing it at school, like high school, and she talked about she obviously hasn't read it since, years later, what stuck in her mind about it, and the two things that stuck in her mind. One was that she felt it had been about sort of dignity and self-respect, which I think is something we might come back to.
Can I just comment on it now rather than repeating ourselves?
Yeah.
So the point about her doing it in education, actually, when I was looking around this, and I was looking at kind of clips of the films and different versions of plays on YouTube, because you can get some of them, I kept scrolling down to the comments, and the top comments would all be, my English teacher sent me here, I'm here for my English assignment, this is my homework. And it's obviously still a play that is really, really widely taught, so presumably it's a play that's going to be familiar to American audiences a lot more, just because of that studying. But yeah, the idea of dignity, Hansberry apparently wrote to her mother just before the play opened on Broadway, kind of saying that she hoped that her mother would like it, she hoped that people would like it, and that she felt that it was about human dignity, that was one of was at the core of the play. And I think, you can agree with that. Quite clear.
And it's really interesting that had stuck in Stephanie's mind, however many years later, and that absolutely was perhaps the central theme that I drew out of the play, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
The other thing that Courtney mentioned, remembering about the play, though, was the strong female characters, and that really resonated with me. Yeah. What about you?
The other thing that Stephanie. So the strong female characters thing, again, because I was doing my research for this video, and I saw a sort of a discussion of the play that talks about those strong female characters. And essentially, so there's Lena, who's the matriarch, there's Ruth, who's the working mum, and there's Benita, who is the student. And in a way, those three women represent three different approaches or visions of womanhood in 1950s, 60s America. So you have Lena, who is very much old school. She's very religious. She has essentially quite conservative values, but very much cares for and promotes her family. And she also has older views perhaps on gender and the way that families should be structured. So she does a lot of talking to her son about how he needs to kind of fill his father's boots, like how he is now the head of the family now that he's lost his father. And there is also a plot point that we didn't mention, that Ruth is newly pregnant, and considering giving up the baby just because of the financial hardship that they're under, and Lena's views on like abortion and life and so on very much fit in with that religious and conservative character that she has.
Yeah.
At the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Beneatha, who is openly questioning religion, and she is very involved in ideas of women's rights and civil rights. It's very important to her to think about her sort of Pan-Africanism and her African heritage, and also to push forward as a woman and to try to be, she's training to be a doctor, so she's really obviously very committed to pushing herself and pushing kind of societal expectations. Then in the middle you have Ruth, and she is this mother character. She has to work really hard to continue to maintain her family, and it's almost like her views on God, her views on civil rights, her views on women's rights, they might be there, but she actually is just focused on pragmatic aspects of life. She can't be worried about women's rights or civil rights because she's just got to think, can I afford to have this baby? What can I do to keep my husband stable when he's becoming increasingly overwhelmed by the stresses of his life? And yeah, she just represents more like the average woman who doesn't have time to think too hard about these issues.
Yeah, she's a real every woman figure that any mother
Yeah.
would recognize, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think she's also someone you can relate to, but you can really, like, for me as a young woman who's very recently been a student, I can really relate to Beneatha as well in terms of like her political activism, but also like that kind of balance between the desire to have fun and go out and with different guys and stuff, but balancing that with her.
She has two boyfriends in the play,
who are like polar opposites. One
that's about money and a sort of aspirational black middle class sort of, and then the other is African is a student in the US and kind of really plays into the whole Pan-Africanism thing. And
I was quite surprised, like quite a lot of the discussion with Beneatha, like, and it's, you can tell it's symbolic of other issues as well, but a lot of it's kind of like about natural hair, and that's something that I didn't realize was such a, like, because I thought it was quite a recent, like the natural hair movement was more of a recent development, but like seeing that going back to that roots where she's kind of deciding, almost like the decision between the two men is also a decision about like how she wears her hair, how she presents her character, the choice to assimilate or be proud of who she is, I suppose.
Yeah. Interestingly, Courtney Ferriter, who got in touch with her thoughts about the play, one of the things that she said is that Lorraine Hansberry said that Beneatha is the character kind of closest to her. So
and I can really see that.
Yeah. Although I thought she really did justice by Lena and Ruth. You know, she doesn't. She honors their role, doesn't she? You know, even if she's
equally Walter as well. She definitely presents his perspective fairly well, and I think a lot of the plays choose him as like the focal character, but you could actually choose other characters as that, if that makes sense. I think
thinking of it as a drama, as the why it's a successful play, I thought actually the you know, like the sort of the three main characters are really well balanced, and they're all very rounded, believable, rich characterizations, aren't they? You know, with dialogue that really kind of distinguishes them, and they're all psychologically kind of vivid, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that makes it work as a play is it's having those good characters, and also having a sense of humor. Like there's really nice comical moments in the play as well.
Four. I said three.
Four. Yeah.
Carry on. Yeah.
I was thinking to my head, like, who's she leaving out?
Just, you know, brain.
Yeah. Of course. And all of those characters have a dream, and that's the A Raisin in the Sun title comes from the poem Harlem by Langston Hughes, and it's about what happens to a dream deferred. Does it shrivel up like a raisin in the sun? And all of them have those dreams that are challenged in different ways and have different responses to those dreams being challenged. And I found it interesting that some of that kind of, you get the sense that because of the bereavement that they've recently had, that they barely talk about, it's made this a moment where dreams are suddenly revised. And Lena is thinking back to when she moved from the south to the north and moved into this flat in Chicago, and the aspirations and hopes and dreams that she had at that point that essentially did shrivel up gradually over the years, and kind of revisiting those dreams and recommitting to them.
Yeah, and that brings us to the plot point, which is about the potential move to a different district of Chicago,
neighborhood,
a different neighborhood, and a predominantly white neighborhood, and that so they can buy a house there, or put a deposit down and have a mortgage, and it's cheap but it's in a white neighborhood where they will not be welcome, and it's made explicit that someone from that neighborhood comes to visit them to almost like try and bribe them to not move to that neighborhood.
Exactly.
And one of the things that Courtney shared with us was that about Lorraine Hansberry's background and her father was a real estate broker who like bought properties and created flats like the kind of flat that they're living in the play, but he bought a house in a white neighborhood of Chicago that had a no blacks covenant, and challenged that and took case all the way to the Supreme Court and essentially won the case. So when Lorraine was like 8, they moved into this house in this neighborhood, but then they experienced like awful racism, vandalism, brick through the window. I think you said that.
Yeah, so I looked into this a little bit, and I found a quote from Hansberry. She wrote later that she remembered there being literally howling mobs surrounding our house. That's her words. And she moved into that house when she was around 8, so really like had some very formative years. She talks about being like beaten up on the way to school as they walked through this white neighborhood, because it was a very segregated city at that time. But now, in fact, that house has been designated as a historical landmark for Chicago, because obviously of the importance that she went on to have. Yeah. And also it was because of from my understanding, it was because of that court case and the progress of the Supreme Court that it brought the family into contact with a lot of prominent people like W.E.B. Du Bois. You named a few earlier on.
Langston Hughes, whose poem she took the title from, W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Duke Ellington, Jesse Owens. They were all friends of the family, and she then worked with some of them in civil rights and journalism, and links into the sort of Pan-African movement. So she had this like very stressful childhood, and her father died when she was 15, and she basically said he died of racism. That was how she, so, but also a really sort of politically and culturally kind of rich environment
that really formed her into who she was who she came to be as a playwright.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that what she says about her father, I hadn't read that, but she died very young of pancreatic cancer, but one of her close friends, and I can't remember who it was, said that he felt that the amount of energy and effort that she put into things like the civil rights movement, effectively the fight that she went through, and the racism that she was fighting took some of her energy. Like, obviously she died of the cancer, but they said like she died of the racism as well, like the situation that she was constantly fighting against.
Yeah, and she was only 35 when she died. She lived, what was it, 1930 to 1965, which is, what a loss. And what might she have done if she'd lived for longer?
Yeah.
I mean,
and she was.
I was going to
say about them.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and I guess another of the stresses and strains in her life, we think now, was probably around her sexuality, because she was married, but it's very clear that
it's pretty well documented that she wrote for some lesbian magazines under her initials.
And was kind of on her way towards perhaps coming out about that, at the point when, but didn't get to because she died when she was 35, and she divorced her husband. But you were saying about her papers.
So her husband donated her papers, her writings, to, I think it might have been like the New York Public Library or something like that, but placed a block on them essentially, so that all of the papers that related to her sexuality could not be viewed for 50 years until 50 years after her death. A subsequent executor reversed that decision in 2013. So actually only a couple of years before it would have been opened out anyway. But that's enabled people to like go back and start studying those papers and kind of review the impact of her sexuality on her life.
Yeah. So
I think there might have been a recent biography. Or a paper based on that.
Yeah, really interesting woman. One of the things that I didn't know till I was reading about her for this video was that she was friends with Nina Simone. She was godmother to Nina Simone's daughter, I think, and when she died, like Nina Simone wrote the song To Be Young, Gifted and Black about her, which is a song that I know so well, and so many different versions of that song, and I had no idea that it was about Lorraine Hansberry.
And actually the words To Be Young, Gifted and Black were Lorraine's own words. She was speaking to I think it was a creative writing group at the end of a creative writing competition, and she came up with those words as like an inspiration to the people that she was working with. So I think it was Irvin who actually wrote the words to the song, and then Nina Simone, like it was a collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's taken us off in lots of different sort of directions, the research for this. But what I suppose I want to come back to is that it's just a really good play. It's not just an interesting play because of its historical significance or its cultural significance for sort of Black American literature or whatever. It was right up there for me in terms of it.
Definitely. I think it's one of the better plays that we've read together, actually.
Yeah. And I was
thinking, we've read some good plays.
And we've read some good plays. And I was it's interesting that plays that have a sort of explicit kind of political purpose, sometimes then that can mean that the quality of the drama and the characterization and so on is lost, whereas this is much more subtle, isn't it? Although the big themes are there, and I think I suppose that it's whether I'm going to let you talk about this, the universal versus the specific, because I watched the 1961 trailer for this, which we should probably link it down below, actually, the trailer for the 1961 film, and it's like a 2.5-minute trailer, but it gets, the first minute is a white man sitting in front of the camera telling people that it's a really good performance, telling people that they're going to be talking about this film, and basically promising that it's going to be like a really interesting cinema experience. And you get to over a minute in before you realize that it's about a Black family. And like I was really shocked by that. And when I was first watching it, I was kind of like, wow, this is weird. But then it was one of the first works to bring Black stories into the mainstream and to present them as mainstream stories that weren't some kind of like niche thing. And it talks about, like, on the trailer, it kind of, the text is like, a modern American family finds out that they've got £10,000 and so on. So they really like almost try and play down the black aspect to it, the racial aspect to it. And apparently there was some debate when the play first came out as to whether it was a universal story or whether it was particular to the Black experience. And I found that idea of that dichotomy to be quite interesting, because there are definitely aspects of this story that I would say are very universal, like those ideas of human dignity, the ideas of family. You were talking earlier about
ways in which it relates to even to situations in the UK, in terms of like extended families living together, overcrowding in housing, people being on top of one another during, like, even during today's lockdown, like
COVID lockdown.
the way that
that the way, you know, just even though you love your family, just being stuck with them in really close quarters doesn't bring the best out of people.
Bring out the best of you. But I think today we wouldn't necessarily say that, like, there are definitely aspects of it that are particular to Black experience, and we wouldn't necessarily say that that's a bad thing, because, you know, in the context of this video, we've gone out of our way to find that perspective. Because
well, now people, you know, it's all, you know, own voices and all that, and people want to hear, or some people want to hear distinct experiences, and that's like that's a positive, rather than we've got to say this is you know, any modern American family. At the same time, you know, when you said that, you know, we were reflecting on this, that it's probably still true that if you make a film today with a sort of predominantly Black cast, there's a risk or expectation that it may be less commercially successful. You know, it's not, that hasn't gone away, has it?
And there are definitely a lot of struggles for Black actors in getting those roles, and Black stories, and getting to go through the whole phases of like being written, being produced, and so on. Like there's definitely a lack of that going through that whole journey to get onto our screens for people to be able to access and enjoy. So there's still that conflict there.
Thinking about the film, like the one UK booktuber who commented, you know, shared a comment about this play for us was Kit of Kit's World, and he used to work for BFI, which is the British Film Institute, and he worked to restore their copy of the film, but he admitted he'd never actually watched it. But he did say now he probably should and read it. But so
and there are versions available on YouTube.
I'm wondering, is there anything else that we want, because I'm conscious of time, and that
I was just looking at the time as well.
Is there anything, one interesting thing that again Courtney brought up, which was like the sort of notable for me too, was I guess the kind of patriarchy in the play. So we talked about the matriarchy, and, you know, Lena being like in effect the head of the family, and Ruth being the person that holds the family together, but it's like they want Walter to step up into that role.
They're all looking at Walter to take up that the kind of the dead father's place, so it's, you know, sadly, to fill that gap.
And, you know, Courtney was saying that that's something that, you know, maybe doesn't sit so well with her now, you know, in 2021, as it were. But we were thinking, she and I were thinking about, but like, obviously, like, Hansberry was quite a feminist, so why was she presenting that? And then it feels like she was probably genuinely presenting what women in the 1950s, but certainly in the 1920s, when she was set the play, you know, they would have felt. And
the play was set at the time, it was Ma Rainey's Black Bottom that was set in the 20s.
Yes.
Sorry.
Going mad again here. But yes, so yes, it was contemporary, wasn't it? It's
those attitudes reflect the time. She was being realistic of the time.
Of the times, But and also that whether that was stronger for like Black American families, Black American women, that whether there's something around that the emasculating legacy of slavery, when like Black men were not able to have a authority in their families because that was taken away from them by that system, that almost like there's a feeling of a need to restore that, and then almost like that, but then you then have to move on to that with feminism, but it's almost like there was a sort of a rebalancing that they were looking for.
And you can tell that I think Walter feels that emasculating thing in himself in terms of his job as a chauffeur, and he talks about how unfulfilling that is and how belittling that role is for himself. So then part of his actions in the play are kind of in a response to how belittled he feels in his working environment.
And
the
so
one other thing,
it makes stupid decisions because he wants to become financially independent. Sad.
The one other thing that I wanted to mention, I guess, was just on the themes of like talking about drama, and like last time we had The Gun, didn't we? I can't remember what the play was called. A Good Day. Happy Days. That's the one. Happy Days.
Yes.
And The Gun, and the Chekhov's gun idea, and if there's a gun, it'll end up being shot. Which didn't turn out to be the case. I just is this kind of idea of fate, and if there's a big pot of money, something's going to go wrong with it. It really reminded me of a scene in The Return of the Native, where somebody has to carry some money somewhere, and obviously like something always happens to kind of tempt the person with the money or to get in their way. And it was just one of those where you could tell from the beginning, like, oh no, please don't let them lose the money, please don't let them lose the money. And you just kind of watch it unfolding. But it was a dramatic device that was used very effectively and did kind of really increase the tension, and was very much something that you could really see happening, because you can really see the temptations that are at play.
And totally believable in terms of the characters, and so not a sort of artificial device to heighten the plot tension. It made sense.
And I was interested in my reaction to that, because like we were saying, all of the characters have dreams, but to me, I valued Benita's dream above Walter's dream, and I was more rooting for her, because she's this young woman, she's going to train to be a doctor, and he's talking about setting up a liquor store, and like in my mind I have obviously this set of values that I was kind of thinking like, oh, they've got to make sure Benita gets that money, and and then I was kind of thinking back to myself of like, well, actually, why shouldn't Walter have his share? Like, why shouldn't they find a way that all of them can kind of get away? But obviously that's not what happens.
And I was rooting for Ruth all the time.
But it's interesting because Ruth didn't so much have a dream of her own, that she was, she didn't really have a want for the money. I mean, she obviously needed the money, but she was the one character that wasn't saying, I need the money for this thing, but she was just thinking about the family as a whole.
What's going to be for the good of the family as a whole. And the ending of the play is interesting, because it's kind of quite an upbeat ending, but
it's hopeful. It feels hopeful,
but subverted by the expectation that they may face awful racism in the white neighborhood if they go and live there, and we won't sort of spoil the ending, but
and it ends with this kind of sense of threat. So there's a character, Mrs. Johnson, who actually was cut from a lot of versions, but her role is basically to intensify that sense of threat. And she talks about, oh, did you hear about that black family that moved into a white neighborhood that got I don't know, beaten up or whatever. I can't remember exactly what she says, but basically killed, or and just to remind the audience of what they're getting into for something that wasn't a political decision on their part. It was literally the house that they could afford. They had no motivation of wanting to upset the social balance at all. They just wanted their own home.
On that note, we should stop and say thank you, everybody, and we hope that this was a great play to read, and roll on our next one.
I enjoyed this play so much. I'm so glad that we read it.
Bye.
Bye. Take care, everyone.